For an in-depth explanation of the pyramids are surveyors' target theory, please see the earlier videos on Eggrock Studio channel on YouTube. Videos titled Pyramids are Checkpoints and Down the Planetary Surveying Rabbit Hole. The basic summary of the theory is that the pyramids were surveyors' targets. The pyramid's purpose was to keep the Earth in the Goldilocks zone relative to the Sun. This is done by measuring the distance between the Earth and the Sun. It's a place that is not too far away and not too close to the Sun, hence the name Goldilocks zone. The Sun is a living, conscious being that is physically looking at the Earth and very possibly sending an energy towards the Earth in order to conduct these measurements. Someone who is growing plants in a greenhouse knows the required conditions to grow the life that they are nurturing. In the same way, the gods who were conducting this planetary surveying knew the required conditions to grow life on this Earth. This is how they knew the correct positions for the pyramids and also the correct distance between the Earth and the Sun. Surveyors' targets are called control points. A surveyor can confidently return to these same points of reference over a long period of time, confident in their accuracy. Surveyors' targets are also used in open-cut mines, as the roads are susceptible to erosion after heavy rain. Heavy trucks travel these roads and landslips are very dangerous. Surveyors' targets are placed along the roads and regularly checked for signs of undesired movement. Surveyors have instruments that can check levels from a distance relative to other targets or control points. EDMs are used for measuring short distances on Earth. However, for measuring longer distances, such as the distance between the Earth and the Moon, lasers and retroreflectors are used. The pyramids are surveyors' target theory proposes that a more advanced measuring technique was used than even the current lasers humans currently have. So in a way it is an ancient aliens or an advanced ancient technology theory. It is interesting to learn about retroreflectors. They're basically like those reflectors you see on the side of the road. They sort of have a corner that reflects light back to its source no matter what direction it's sent in.
The distance to the Moon is regularly measured by flashing a light at it and then timing the return of the reflection. Not quite like this, but rather with a laser and a telescope. The laser beam is aimed at reflectors which were left on the surface of the Moon by the Moon mission astronauts. This technique can measure the distance to the Moon and changes in that distance to better than 3 centimeters. The total distance travelled by the laser is then calculated by multiplying the time that it takes from sending the laser to receiving the reflection by the speed of light. Since the laser light travels both to the Moon and back, the distance to the Moon is half of this calculated distance.
In this image, lines have been drawn to symbolize the act of a measurement being taken via the transmission of an energy. No lines are actually visible when this sort of surveying is conducted with EDMs. However, when lasers are used, the laser would be visible at night in fog, but probably not during the daytime. The pyramids a surveyor's target theory proposes that the surveying was conducted during the daytime when the sun was directly overhead of the pyramids, which would mean that if there was an actual beam sent, it would not be visible, so the entire phenomena may not even be visible to the naked eye. However, drawing a line to represent the measuring of a distance or the act of looking or perceiving drawing a line between the two objects is an accurate way of depicting that there is an interaction between the two objects. I would propose that when these alignments occurred in the ancient past at places like the Giza pyramids, they would have been quite visually spectacular, and lots of people would have gathered to witness this surveying being conducted. The gods know how to put on a show. There were viewing areas in places like Karnak, Egypt, for the solstices. Why would there be viewing areas if there was nothing to see? The fact that a lot of people gathered to watch these events is strong indication that there was a visual phenomena to be seen at these alignments. A lot of artists intuitively draw a laser type line emitting directly from the middle top of the pyramids going straight upwards. I approve of this theory, whether it's just a representation of being looked at or whether there's an actual laser that can be visually seen. Either way, I think it is a very accurate depiction of what these structures were for. The reason it so clearly makes sense is because these structures become symmetrically coherent when looked from directly above, looking straight down, as if they were intended to be looked at from above. I like this one because it depicts the lasers triangulating an object above them, as in the same way our eyes triangulate the objects they're looking at. The object that was being triangulated was the sun. The angles are obviously greatly exaggerated. What I don't like about this one is that it's the Death Star theory, which is that, I don't know, the pyramids were somehow dangerous, which is an inversion of reality because their direct purpose was to allow the earth the capacity to grow life. It's like saying that the Giza pyramids were for tombs for dead bodies when no bodies were found in them, and they are actually used for the creation of life on this earth, and death is not their symbol, life is their symbol. Just as Angkor Wat, they claim it was for a tomb for a dead body as well, but no dead bodies were found in it. And its purpose is for the creation of life, not destruction. So that's an inversion of reality theory. Yeah, I like that one. It just needs the white casing stones to indicate how reflective it was. There is no reason why the beam would get thicker as it goes upwards. It would be the same thickness all the way along. And I don't think they were used for generating electricity. And if they were, I don't see why they would just beam the electricity up into the air. The solar system is a big machine designed to create life for us, which is far more valuable than just power lines, which is just a human projection of valuable worth. I'm sure Tesla was great, but I don't think he was at the construction of solar systems and whole planets level. I don't think they were used for generating electricity. They were used for generating life. It's cool, but it needs white casing stones. They've got the beam correctly, but they've got them joining as one line, which is silly because it's like drawing one line emanating from your two eyes when one has two eyes, so one would draw two lines, and in this case there should be three lines. Needs white casing stones. The area around the base should be clear of any other structures or foliage or debris, because these structures were used as sundials for other times of the year, so the shadow that was cast around the structures was very important. One does not contaminate the sundial's reading area with trees or other buildings that aren't related to the purpose of the structure being a sundial. When these structures were actually functioning, they would not have allowed large sand build-ups around the base of the structure, nor trees and foliage to grow abundantly, obscuring the readings. I suppose if one doesn't want to depict them when they were functioning, that's fair enough. I think the term womb is a very apt description of these structures. The problem with this image is that they're pointing in alignment of comets instead of pointing at the sun, and all three of them should be pointing at one object instead of three separate objects. But yeah, I like this one a lot. Yeah, the cosmic engine is a good description, because I believe the sun is actually an artificial intelligence supercomputer. At these higher levels, the gods, they are machine, robot, organic living thing. It's like a combination of like all different types of things, but they're hyper intelligent orbs or spheres of consciousness. And our whole solar system and galaxy is a living conscious entity. Needs casing stones, and it's a lovely energy depicted, but I think the energy would be more direct and straight and not just sort of like tentacles or whatever. Needs casing stones. The outer surfaces would have been perfectly smooth when it was functioning. They were power stations. The power they generated was the power of the earth to bear life, not electricity. And it needs casing stones and the vegetation cleared around the base. It's a very efficient creation, but it's not a free energy machine, as evidenced by the human sacrifices demanded by the Mayan gods. The Mayan gods whom constructed pyramids, so we're clearly conducting planetary surveying. Strong indication that it's not a free energy device, and the fact that human sacrifice still goes on in the form of warfare shows that it's not a free energy device, but it's a pretty damn efficient one. I'm not sure what his theory is, but it's obviously Death Star theory type stuff, which is defensive measures, a projection of human insecurities. But if one analyzes our solar systems, it has like a force field, which is like a huge bumper bar that the sun emits, which actually pushes stuff out of our way that's dangerous to us. So that's a defense mechanism that our solar system has. Yeah, well, this one is too small, and the surrounding area is contaminated by other structures which would obscure the shadows of the sundial's readings. I approve of this image, most likely just photoshopped, but that's alright. I would use rainbow coloured beam instead of just white. But the spirit of imagery like this rings true to me. So this is the theory that the pyramids were pointing at a star system in the night sky. I would suggest that this theory is incorrect because the stars are moving across the sky during the night, and so at what point is the designated survey time? Our distance to the sun is a much more important reading, and I would suggest that the pyramids are pointing directly to the sun and measuring that distance, not measuring a distance to a further star system. I do think survey readings were being conducted to star systems beyond our galaxy, but they were done from the shafts of the pyramids, from the king's and queen's chamber, and not from where the top of the pyramid was pointing directly to. You see how there were two beams coming out of each chamber. There's two beams coming out of the king's chamber, two beams coming out of the queen's chamber. What that would suggest is that when one alignment from one shaft is pointed at, the other one is also required to be pointed at, which means that, and I'm not sure what those alignments were. It might have been the sun and a star system, or it might have just been two star systems aligned, but they obviously decided that when those two systems are in alignment, that's the required conditions for us to grow life. The fact that the top of the pyramid, the fact that the tip of the pyramid does not connect to the lower chambers would indicate that it's a separate reading, separate from the midday alignment reading of the sun. So this theory is the theory that the pyramids were pointing towards a star system in the night time. I would suggest this theory is incorrect. I would suggest the pyramids were pointing at the sun and the sun's position during a midday alignment when the sun was directly overhead of these structures. I would say they were also doing survey readings of star systems beyond our galaxy, but that was done through the shafts that are emanating from the king and queen's chambers. So these structures certainly were, the gods were very much present in these structures, so it is true there was a higher levels of energy present around them and in them. But as far as this bottom left one as being a vortex, doesn't really make sense to me. Certainly one could get the gods' attention in places like this, but man, you better have something important to say to them, because they're very busy conducting planetary surveying, and you know, if you're just going to harass them with trying to get spiritual powers or like serving your own ego, they'll probably just smite you down. So if you do spend the night in the pyramids, in the king's chamber, I would say the gods would analyze every speck of your soul thoroughly, and it would be quite a telling and powerful experience. But people who think that pyramids are designed to give us spiritual upgrades, I don't really think that's true. By providing us a planet that can support life, that is the means to spiritual upgrading. It doesn't have to occur at these structures. And if you're just getting in their way of their planetary surveying, they'd probably just get annoyed at you. You've got a whole planet to upgrade your spiritual powers. I think they've got the beam spot on with this one, whether just symbolically representative or whether or not it was actually visible. And also the prism on the top, very accurate to reflect the signal back from the source. Obviously the problem with this one is the pyramid's black where it should be white. A surveyor's target, its purpose is to be highly reflective so as to be seen from a long way away, and black is the opposite of that purpose. these structures were not designed to be lived in like skyscrapers, so that's the obvious design fault that most modern recreations of pyramids make like this. And also the surrounding area should be free of other buildings because they would obscure the shadow of the sundial readings that were being observed from above. The beam coming to this structure encompasses the whole structure rather than just the center point, where the beam should just be at the center point where the reflective prism is. The rest of the structure is just pointing towards the center point. The ring at the top is the geometric solid theory, which is just a silly recreation of other geometric solids just because the pyramids are triangular. They're not power plants, they're surveyors' targets. The Earth's capacity to bear life, I guess that is a power, and in my mind a far more worthy power than just electricity. Electricity, like a coal-fired power station, is just a human projection of valuable worth. The real valuable treasure we have is the Earth's capacity to bear life. I do think there was a beam coming out of that shaft at the King's and Queen's Chamber. As I say, it would have just been a surveying beam as they were taking measurements of star systems beyond our galaxy, and probably not readings of our sun. Okay, they've got the top section of the pyramid separated and hovering above the lower sections, which is just a representation of the all-seeing eye symbolism, where the top section is separated from the lower section. That separation just represents that it's something on the non-physical plane, it's on a higher level. That's why it's separated, but the actual prism on top of the tip of the pyramid would have been intact on top of the structure. And we can see they've whacked the Earth in between the top and the bottom section, which is pretty odd. And then they've got humans ascending at the top, which is accurate, I would say, in that the Earth is a place for us to spiritually grow. This is one of the most famous science fiction renditions of pyramids. It's obviously silly, but the notion that they are somehow, there's flying is involved or levitation is correct, but they've projected it onto the target instead of the whole planet. Our planet is a spaceship, so is the sun. They're objects that are flying or floating through space. It's just that they don't go anywhere they want. They have a specific direction they have to go for specific reasons. So they've just taken the projection of a spaceship or something moving around and then just applied that to a physical structure made of rock, which is just obviously silly, but it's an intuitive grasp they've seen. If you guys want to build pyramids, I think you need to make them more aesthetically pleasing. I think when these structures were originally finished, they would have looked a lot nicer than they look now, and certainly nicer than this looks. But I have had some interesting interactions from higher forces by digging round circular or geometric symmetrical shapes in the ground. And if one looks at crop circles, obviously they're not pyramids and they were not used for planetary surveying, but it shows a willingness by the gods to interact with us, and it's certainly possible. The gods are certainly interested in geometric shapes and complex, sort of hyper-intelligent themes. Especially if they're represented large on the ground and easily seen from above. The whole Earth is a healing house, not just these structures. Don't get in the way of their surveying, just annoys them. So the first Halo game had these spitters, which they periodically just let a projection of light straight up into the air as a sort of a comet. And there's no specific lore in the game as to what they were used for, but I found them very interesting. Just like the solid beam of light coming off the top of the pyramids, it's an intuitive perception of what these structures were for. But instead of there being a constant beam, it just periodically sends off a signal occasionally. A very male, masculine kind of effect. But it's actually quite accurate in that the survey readings were only conducted probably on the equinoxes and the solstices. But to maintain the excitement of the game, they just have the light beams coming off every 20-30 seconds, whereas really it was every 6 months. And so the structures are made of metal instead of rock. I prefer rock structures, they look cooler. But my impression of these structures is they looked at pyramids and they saw that it was a large thing that obviously had a purpose that was beyond most people's fathoming, but it clearly did have a purpose. And so they created these sort of large sculpture type objects that were just a backdrop for the game. If one day humans do try and construct a new solar system, a new Earth that can bear life, structures like these may well indeed be constructed to measure the distance between the Earth and the Sun, and the Earth and other planets. But yeah, there's some planetary surveying going on right there, measuring the distance between the two heavenly bodies for the purpose of growing life. The first Halo game had that feel of like humans were capable of constructing new planets and new worlds, and yeah, I think it's good to visualize these things and try and portray them as accurately as possible so people can visualize what was and wasn't going on, because we do need to construct another planet Earth. It's what our destiny is, I think. I do think the top of the Giza pyramids would have been hollowed out to a degree at the very tip there, going down a few meters at least, just like Angkor Wat. I go into that in those earlier videos referenced, but the purpose being, in order to point into a direction, you need two reference points. So you need the top of the structure, and then you need the second point embedded down within the structure so that the line can be drawn. It's like drawing a line with a ruler using two dots. If you've just got one dot, the line could go any direction, but if you've got two dots, then there's a specific direction that the line is pointed, being referenced. There is evidence that the Sphinx was also used for planetary surveying, and it apparently had a hole in its head, and so it would have had an embedded tunnel in its head in order to establish 2 points pointing to a position of a heavenly body like the Sun, most probably the Sun. There's a history of these monuments having tunnels and holes being covered over. If one looks at Angkor Wat, where they covered up the inner sanctum and they don't allow people in there, and okay, so this theory was basically just very early science fiction artists looking at the pyramids and going, oh, they're giant triangles, that's a geometric solid, I'm going to draw lots of other large geometric solids, and that'll show you how futuristic I am. That's basically where that came from. Geometric solid theory. Ring, giant ring. Geometric solid cut out of another geometric solid with lines in it. So if you want to do a futuristic city, apparently you just have to create large structures that are impractical for being lived in, because they've seen pyramids and they've seen that they're not skyscrapers for living in. So if you can push away from a geometric shape, just a large sculpture that has lots of excess construction work just to make it look like an interesting shape, but that serves no practical purpose and that certainly can't be lived in. That's the number one rule to designing a futuristic city. It's not lived in. It's just a big shape plonked there. And heaven forbid it couldn't be for planetary surveying either. So the Stargate theory is the theory that the pyramids are a landing pad for a spaceship. I'm open to the idea of there being a lens cap over the tip when the structures were not being used for surveying, but certainly no large spaceships would have landed on top of them, in my opinion. However, if one considers our sun to be a spaceship, then, and like if one considers landing above the pyramids to be being in the Goldilocks zone above the Earth, the correct distance from the Earth, if you consider that to be landing every equinox or solstice whenever these survey readings were conducted, I suppose you could say that the sun is a spaceship that is landing above the pyramids, but it certainly doesn't sit on top of them. It's certainly well off from the top of the structure. But as I say, the lens cap theory certainly resonates with me, because on top of these pyramids there was probably a retroreflector to reflect the signal back to the sun. That's how surveying is conducted, to measure the distance. And any photographer will tell you that, and surveyors, you don't leave your high-end optics equipment to the rain and the dust when it's not in use. Notice how these scenes are very dark and scary. That's an inversion of reality. I think planetary alignment at the equinoxes and solstices would have been a very joyous event for all the people and not scary. And it would have been all rainbows and light, and well, there certainly would have been nice weather, because bad weather, it would be difficult to photograph or conduct surveying in bad weather. Ask any photographer or surveyor and they'll tell you one doesn't leave high-end optics equipment laying out in the rain and the weather. So the lens cap on the pyramids would have been there to prevent mold, dust build-up, and anything else that would dirty the surface of the lens. Impurities on the lens contribute to inaccuracies in the readings. So just to rehash, there was a spaceship directly above the pyramids. It was our sun, and the sun is a spaceship, and it's actually an artificial intelligence machine, cross life form, sphere orb, hyper intelligent orb sphere that protects us. And so it was landing above us at the correct distance away from us at the designated times, but it certainly wasn't a big clanky spaceship. So they weren't skyscrapers for human habitation. The top of this structure is damaged for some reason. The laser is good, and the red orb looks evil. It looks like it's a planet, not an orb, but it's sort of got ominous undertones that the whole thing is evil. And the foreground, the whole thing is a mechanical city for human habitation, obviously, which would be incorrect because the shadows couldn't be read with these surrounding structures. But there's that intuitive feeling in science fiction that in order to create a new world, pyramids have to be involved somehow. So it's just an intuitive thing that everyone sort of seems to have. But so the hovering top section on top of them is taken from the all-seeing eye symbology, when the thing that is hovering above the pyramids is the sun, not the triangle. So they've taken that dollar bill symbology a bit too literally. Again, there's living structures around the structure and other waterfalls that would obstruct the shadow readings. And they've done that thing where to create a futuristic city, you just do really large impractical sort of buildings that just look like sculptures. The gods liked having something to look at. That's why they painted all those elaborate patterns at Karnak and the hieroglyphs. That's why they painted them to be seen from the sun, not for the people down. Well, they did art for the people as well, but large art to be seen by the sun god Ra. So this is Stargate spaceship landing pad theory combined with skyscraper habitation theory. It should be lens cap theory, and it's a excessively large lens cap because the lens only needed to cover the very tip where the reflector prism was, as well as there was a splitter next to the reflector that split the beam in 4 directions, so the cardinal directions were checked as well. Basically like those big wheels when you see in those pirate movies, they've got those big wheels that guide which direction the ship goes. The beam that was split in the 4 cardinal directions was a wheel to steer the Earth. So Thor City, a large, excessively impractical building that's more of a sculpture than a practical skyscraper, not for human habitation, and pushed away from a geometric solid as much as possible. But the sense of like there's a clear purpose for it, but no one really knows what it is. It's clearly there's a reason, but it's too deep for you to fathom what the reason could be. Skyscraper theory, kind of like the building in Blade Runner. They weren't skyscrapers. It's got the moon there and some other flying thing. Could be the sun, but that intuitive feeling that there was something above the structure and there was a reason for it to be above the structure. And then there's the buildings around the bottom which would obstruct the shadow readings, so they wouldn't be allowed. And you know, the gods don't want to deal with sewage pipes and all the stuff that comes with human habitation. These structures were too sacred for all of that. Okay, it's not. They weren't for human habitation. They weren't for living in by anyone. It's purely planetary surveying, practical. Incorrect skyscraper theory again. The beams are coming off other structures, which they did sometimes, but maybe like that round one, but not these other smaller structures that weren't. The surveyors' targets had to be the center point has to be easily perceived, and the overhead body that is looking at the target has to know when it is in the correct position. So if it's not a pyramid type structure that tapers towards the center, the viewer cannot perceive that it's in the correct position. So just these normal rectangular skyscraper buildings, the center point has to be seen to align to the center. Otherwise it's more difficult for the viewer to know when alignment is approaching. So the hovering object above the pyramids, could be a reference to the all-seeing eye dollar bill symbology, where the top section is separated. Or it could be a reference to the sun, which is what was being surveyed. Those big knobbly things that stick up would impede the surveying of the cardinal directions, so that wouldn't be practical. But the planets up in the sky there, symbolically, like, I think people intuitively understand it's got something to do with the planets. So they put them there, they put the planets in, but they're never like directly above the structures. But it's quite difficult to depict the planets directly above whilst looking from a side view. Okay, they've allowed sand to build up around the structure, which they wouldn't do because it would impede with the shadow readings. And spaceships. Yeah. The sun is a spaceship, the earth is a spaceship, our solar system is a spaceship, our auric field is our spaceship, and it can become physical. We are more our aura than our physical body. The body is a residue of the auric field. And manifesting physical mechanical spaceships is a low level practice. The higher spirit beings have etheric bodies that they can fly around in. They don't need to be physical machines. Okay, the defensive measures theory. Well, obviously untrue, but hey. But if you want to look into defensive measures, I would advise checking out the heliosphere, which is very interesting. Our sun has a force field around our solar system that protects us from harmful anything, because the sun god Ra is conscious and is actively protecting us and has an agenda to look after us, which is why I don't worry about meteorites and such. But when the dinosaurs were wiped out, that was a deliberate decision to get rid of them and to bring in a new types of life. And they may have decided they want to get rid of humans, but I don't think so. So skyscraper theory with physical metal spaceships instead of our sun spaceship. So this one has the intuitive feeling that there's something above the pyramids, which is correct. They've just misperceived what it is. But there's that strong, overwhelming feeling that it's pointing at something. It's like a big arrow or a big finger just pointing at something, triangulating a point, our sun. This right here, this is the sun, is a spaceship. Our earth is a spaceship. I get really annoyed with those whole Dyson sphere theories, as if they want to surround something like the sun with solar panels to harness its energy. It's just utter ridiculousness, because obviously we're already harnessing its energy to grow life on Earth, which is all we really need. Why would you cover it in solar panels? It's already a functioning system, and it's far superior than what's being proposed. To cover it, surround it with a solid spaceship sort of shell. It's just ridiculous. This is sun god Ra. This is a living conscious entity. It's a torus of energy. Just like our auric field, it's a spaceship. And it has aspects that manifest on the physical realm, but it's a living conscious entity. And it can think, and it can see, and we owe everything to it. This is the same one, but a different angle from before. Skyscraper theory with the hovering third eye, the hovering all-seeing eye from the dollar bill theory. I don't know what that one's called, but something above that is defying gravity, which should be the sun. Skyscraper theory. You can shit inside the gods EDM, but I don't think they'd be very impressed. You might get spiritual powers from rubbing shoulders with their presence, but really they just want to do their surveying, and you're in their way. If you want to impress them, build them a surveyor's target. Skyscraper theory with 4 half circles on top, which is symbolic of the sun being surveyed. You want to depict a futuristic world, just whack in a pyramid. It's basically a big structure that says, I have deep, profound meaning that you can't fathom. That's what a pyramid symbolizes. Yeah, cool. Except that it's black and it's I like the prism on the top of it. The roads are in the way of the shadow readings, and you don't want to go inside it except for surveying the star systems beyond our galaxy. A bit too abstract to bother criticizing, but maybe spaceships that are shaped in triangular pyramid shape. But yeah, probably not practical on the rings of Saturn, but hey, it's cool. This is Krishna. Vishnu appeared to be the main surveyor, and his name was Vishnu the Preserver, so yeah, interesting. It's too steep an angle for the structure to last a long time. Obviously they want the structure to last for a long time, but it's got a planetary body behind it. When it should, the body should be directly above it, but it's very hard to depict a side view with an object above it. Skyscraper theory, and those obelisks things were used for shadow readings as well, so you wouldn't have them embedded in another structure, as one could not perceive the shadows. And it's not a very practically shaped structure because it wouldn't last long, because it's all those indentations in the side. UFOs above the pyramids. The sun is the UFO. Skyscraper theory, but the sun is directly above it, which is good. Intuitively correct, but it's not a symmetrical or practical structure. But as I said, if one day we construct new solar systems and we make these pyramids out of metal instead of rock, if like the whole planet's made of metal like a spaceship, then something like this could be happening. There's too many buildings around the structure which would interfere with shadow readings, and I can't see it properly, but it looks like a skyscraper theory with a big sort of something on top of it, which would be impractical. I like the glowing prisms on the top. However, I really think the surveying was conducted during the daytime, so there wouldn't have been much surveying conducted at night time. Maybe out of the shafts of the King and Queen's chamber, but not from the tip. And they didn't build these structures near water or where there's potential for erosion, or because they needed them to last for as long as possible, and they were very aware of geology and how to make a structure last extremely long periods of time. Skyscraper theory, with electricity running through it. Too many structures around it cluttering the shadows. So there's spaceships above the pyramids. Yes, there is. But those spaceships are planets, and they are specifically at a set distance above the pyramids at specific times of the year, usually equinoxes and solstices. Skyscraper theory, too many buildings surrounding it, and they think they're going to get magical powers living in a triangular shaped skyscraper. I like this one a lot because the planetary body is directly above the structure. Even though it's a side view, it's symbolically above it, like the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, where the radiations of the light coming from the eye symbolize the sun. It represents it being directly above it, but the side view means that, well, just for practicality purposes, it's just portrayed symbolically as above it. The angle of the surrounding pyramids is too steep, because if they make the angle too sharp, they don't last. They're not as durable, and they don't last as long. And the other thing about the surrounding ones is that they're not aligned with the cardinal directions, which is the secondary readings were of the cardinal directions. The primary reading was the distance between the tip of the pyramid and the sun. Okay, this one isn't symmetrical. The purpose of a surveyor's target is to locate the center point. So the observer that's looking straight down from above, if they're offside of the center point, they need to redirect their targeting system to the center. So that line work on the edge, it's not symmetrical, so it will just confuse the observation. And this one has references to the all-seeing eye with the hovering object above the structure, which should be the sun, not the prism. Skyscraper theory, maybe. Too many structures around it. It looks like power plants nearby. Hovering prism on the top. The hovering object is our sun, and from the sun's point of view, the earth is a hovering object. Skyscraper theory looks like it's based on the Pyramid of the Sun, Blade Runner type building. But the angle of those sides of pyramids like that, it's for viewing from above, so that one can determine when the center point has reached the center. There's no practical purpose for a skyscraper habitation for humans. So this one is a spaceship above the pyramids, and they're pointing at something. Yes, the sun is their spaceship that it's pointing at. So if you research a torus is like a donut. Like if you cut an apple in half along the axis, you can see that center point line that runs up, and then the energy comes up the top and around the sides and then back in and under the below. UFOs, like these flying saucers, resemble the torus shape. Earth also is a torus, except it's more of a sphere, so it's just a fuller sort of donut. It's than these UFO type flattened ones. And so is our sun. Our sun is also a torus. It has a central axis and it rotates, and it would have a different type of energy running up the center relative to its outer sections. So when I see stuff like this, those UFOs symbolically represent our sun. Just that people are misperceiving the technology that's being looked at. The intuitive feeling that they are pointing at a high-tech torus above us. Yes, it is true. That high-tech torus is our sun. It's just that it's a little bit higher than portrayed here, and it's not made of metal. It's a spiritual energy, high technology, more advanced than physical craft like these UFOs. Okay, this one is very famous. Metal is not a good substance to build a structure out of because it does not last for a long period of time. Were aliens helping build these structures? Very probably. We do not have the means to conduct planetary surveying yet, and if one analyzes ancient history of the Hindus, the baton of civilization is passed on from one creation to the next. Eventually we'll be world builders, and the people in the next solar system that we construct, they'll look at us as aliens. It is curious to wonder why they don't interact with us directly, but I'm sure they have their reasons. I like this image because it shows Giza-like pyramids half constructed. And if one looks at the Giza pyramids, the shafts from the king's chambers they change direction. And my theory was that they were surveying a star system, and then they, for whatever reason, decided to survey a different star system whilst the structure was half finished. So they were conducting surveying from it while it was half finished, and before the final sort of rotation system was finalized. I like this one because it symbolizes surveying being conducted through those shafts from the king's chamber, which I definitely concur with. However, the patterns on the sides of the structure are not symmetrical and would just confuse the viewer who is looking straight down from above at the structure, trying to locate the center point. Those survey readings from the king's chamber were secondary readings, they weren't primary. So they were important, but the outer surface of the structure would not revolve around those readings. There's a spaceship, which is a reference to, it's something futuristic that we don't comprehend yet. The thing is, spaceships like this are archaic. Really highly advanced spaceships are spheres of energy that are virtually translucent on the physical plane and can pop in and out of the physical realm. This is clunky old spaceship technology. Let's flip a geometric solid upside down and add a rough texture. And it's too small, and it's inside a cave. It needs to be outside because it's viewed from above. The luminous properties of this one are probably accurate in that the pyramids would have been luminous somehow. Probably jewels and gold, and debatable whether or not valuable minerals were used, as they would be robbed. These structures would have been luminous when being used. However, I doubt the surrounding area would have gone into decline whilst the structure was still functional. they would have maintained the surrounding area as well if was required. Skyscraper theory combined with floating object above theory, but it's in an underground cave, which isn't accurate because these structures were designed to be viewed from above, so there's no point building them in a cavern or underground or like in a canyon. On the Giza pyramids, the outer casing stones still remain on the second largest one, but it looks like they've flipped this, and the roughness is peeling off on the outside and it's smoother underneath. But the overall feeling and theme of this is that this is an alien world and there's pyramids there, so it's like universally known that they're fundamental to the creation of life and the construction of worlds and functioning solar systems that are capable of sustaining life. I like this one. It's got the planetary body directly above the tip, which is accurate, even if it's just symbolically because it's a side view. Nice colour schemes. It's a nice image, however the smoke coming out the top indicates it's being used as a chimney and they weren't for human habitation. And the landscape that one's built on does not look particularly long-lasting and stable, which was a significant factor in the choosing of their location. This one has themes of Armageddon in that if the pyramids are destroyed or were destroyed, then the whole world would be destroyed as well, which is, yeah, intuitively correct in a way. Yeah, I like the name Pyramids from Space. It's intuitively correct. Pyramids are required to construct a habitable planet. So this is the geometric solid theory, and it's floating. Could be a spaceship, but then there's the gateway, which like Karnak or Hatshepsut symbolizes, well, it's planetary surveying and planetary alignment. And the bottom half of his body is in another dimension or something like that. So symbolic of an energy from somewhere else interacting with our reality. I'm not just going to have the tip of the geometric solid floating, I'm going to have the whole thing floating, and it's going to be segmented into even weirder shapes. The thing that is floating above us is the sun, not the structure pointing at the sun. Geometric solid floating, flipped upside down, skyscraper theory. With a gravity-defying, all-seeing eye theory mixed together. And they've whacked those pillars on the structure, which would be difficult to get shadow readings from them, but the kind of doomsday feeling from this one, where if the pyramids are destroyed, we're destroyed, which is, it could have been true in the past, and the feeling that without structure, without these kinds of structure, there's no structure in our realm and the rotation of our planets. Geometric solid theory with gravity-defying all-seeing eye theory, skyscraper theory, copy and paste flipped upside down in the background theory, surrounded by more skyscrapers that would obstruct shadow readings. But the implication vibe by the flying spaceships is that in order to become technologically advanced, one needs to construct pyramids, or at least understand what and why one would do that, because they're fundamental to having a futuristic society. The intuition that ancient peoples were highly advanced. The purpose of the Great Pyramid of Giza was a power plant. It was a power plant, however, the power that it was generating was the entire Earth's capacity to bear life, not electricity through power lines. So this sort of line work, at least it's luminous and symmetrical. However, the purpose of the line work is to draw the viewer's eye to the center point, which this line work might be a little bit confusing for such a purpose. The intuition that these structures are related to the stars and the heavenly bodies, very true. One can whack any stars or space imagery behind these structures and one's intuition immediately recognizes the truth. And there's no prism on the top. There's too many buildings around it. They've whacked Hatshepsut facade on the side of the pyramid, and the shadow readings would be imperceptible with all those surrounding structures. Whack stars behind them, everyone intuitively knows it's 100% related. Whack some planetary bodies behind them, everyone's intuition kicks in. I don't think there would have been pyramids in the North and South Pole because it's not necessary to do survey readings from those points, because these extreme locations do not have clear line of sight to sunlight, and so they're not a practical location to conduct surveying from. Spaceship landing pad theory. They've just shoved Abu Simbel type facade on the side of the pyramid. Stars, timeless and classic. Can't argue with it. Geometric solid. Stars pointing at something interesting. The line work would be pointing to the center point for a viewer who's directly above. All-seeing eye symbology. Pointing at something. Beams of light from the center point, accurate, but not at night time. Stars, accurate. Nice. It's got plants growing on it. Go on and skyscraper theory with coal power plants, comets. Nothing to say about that one. Stars. The edge of the line work on the corners is too obscured. The purpose of the line work on the edges is to point to the center point, and one would not obscure the edge work with patterns. Lens cap, flying lens cap. Vibrations. Unstable foundations. I'm going to mess with the format. Pointing at a comet and a star in the snow. Don't you think the laws of physics would have been different on a much earlier planet like Earth? Like, if the Earth was smaller, if you subscribe to the expanding Earth theory, or if it was just much, much, much older, millions and millions of years ago, don't you think the laws of physics could have been different? Why did the gods need us to communicate information for them? Why can't they do it for themselves? Apparently it helps us. It's part of our spiritual growth. It's beneficial for us, for them to communicate through us. And in the same way, it's beneficial for them, for us to use them to do things like levitation and construct these structures. I've seen orbs. They're real and they will interact with you, but they're very shy. Yeah, I like this one, except the tip would be blue or clear. I suppose if that's a lens cap, it could be gold. But if it was gold, thieves might try and steal it. Maybe that wasn't an issue, maybe it was. Black is completely the wrong colour scheme, which is maybe why I find this one so interesting. It's the opposite. It's an inversion of reality, but it's a cool image. ridiculous colour scheme, which is why it's cool. The prisms on the top are way too big, and it looks like skyscraper theory as well. Jonathan Salter is obviously the best artist on this planet. I like the way he keeps the line work symmetrical, and it's luminous, like it's glowing, which fits the description of a surveyor's target. Beams of light going upwards from the center point. With triangulation from multiple points. But it's the color schemes, it's so full of life, and like there's no darkness. It's like his line work, he's used Shipibo style, like Amazon line work, tribal line work all over the structures he paints. When I was young, I kept having these visions where I would see like a sphere a geometric solid, like a sphere or a cube or a triangle, and it would be really plain with no detail on it whatsoever. And then I would see the exact same object covered in really intricate patterns, and then it would jump back to being really plain and simple again. And I just kept seeing it. And then when I got into my teens and I started doing artwork similar to Jonathan's here, that theme stopped sort of being in my subconscious. The gods appreciate aesthetic beauty. They don't want crappy structures that aren't aesthetically pleasing. They want intricate detail that's pleasing on the eye, nice to look at, nice colours. If the outer structure of these pyramids was white instead of brown, that'd look crazy cool. But it's alright. Here's geometric OCD. Gets my tick of approval. It'd be good to make 3D sculptures that are backlit by LED lights with these sorts of patterns to get that luminous effect. So the Freemason symbolism is very interesting. They did the all-seeing eye that was on the dollar bill. So my impression is that the radiations of the lines coming out of the eye represent the sun, and that the sun is looking at the pyramids. And it's a side view with the sun, but like the sun would be looking straight down at the pyramids, but they've symbolically represented it from a side view. And so the eye in the pyramid symbolizes the prism on top of the Giza pyramids, which would have been used for planetary surveying in the cardinal directions and the distance between the Earth and the Sun. And then they've got the square and the compass, which is a reference to geometry and being architects and constructing buildings. But then they've got this other symbology where they'll have two pillars on the left and the right, and one will be holding up the sun and the other will be holding up the moon. So the pillars symbolize night and day, and that the pillars are holding up the night and the day, which symbolizes the rotation of the planets. And then there's the checkerboard floor, which is just like a yin-yang, black and white duality. But it's very interesting symbolism. I wouldn't mind drawing some of that stuff, but they build very nice buildings, but for some reason this public symbolism that they put out isn't all that amazing. Maybe they have like art that they don't show the public that is more sort of